I mean, there's a whole subculture of people in the libertarian philosophy that they've created this boogeyman called the state. So they think, you know, if we just free the market and we don't have coercive policies, and they talk about, of course, moral principles, which is usually a waste of time. The non-aggression principle is something that comes up. Well, that's great. You know, thou shalt not kill either, but that doesn't seem to have done a whole lot just to tell people not to do that. There has to be a system reference. You can't have any behavior in a system that isn't reinforced by the system. You know what I mean? You can't have if it's not structurally reinforced, it doesn't matter what your moral codes are, people are going to continue to deviate towards what is working. And corruption and abuse and exploitation is what works in this model because it's based on that fundamental predication when you really break it down because of its underlying basis in scarcity, and I can't emphasize that enough.
You talk about how the state exists now as merely a tool of the market. Can you break down the historical context of this relationship?
Well, let's think about this. Neolithic revolution happened. We were all nomads wandering around with small tribes. And I'm sure there was some kind of regulatory tradition that occurred amongst any type of organized society, but it wasn't until we settled and we started to, you know, take land masses, have land masses near water sources, and we started to build, you know, civilization as we know it with centralized communities. With that, there's an inherent need for protection in a scarcity-driven world. You know, obviously, if you're a small society and you're next to a really nice freshwater pond and you're in a region that doesn't have many of those, other tribes are going to start to run out of water and there's going to be conflict. They might come in and take your stuff, as has, of course, happened over and over again, as, of course, happens right now in the world today as well when it comes to energy resources. But, so you have to have, some type of protection system. So what does that imply? It means that some type of power has to be allocated to some subgroup, some authority, and they are going to be given the right to have certain legislations put in place. They're going to be given the right to have control over others. Then you take the act of commerce, which has been around for thousands of years. This is one of the great failures of thought with free market theory and this sort of libertarian concept and the truncated frame of reference that they have. It's not that the market started with Adam Smith. The market's in its core philosophical basis of specialization and trade and handicraft and barter and using mediums of exchange. That's gone back thousands of years. So we have tons of history to reference about what this type of patterning does to behavior and what it requires in order to regulate it, because when you have a scarcity-driven system of commerce, you're going to have fraud. You're going to have corruption. You're going to have people that are going to, for their own necessity, it's not that they're bad, but they're put into a position of pressure because of their survival, and they're going to do things that aren't necessarily equal. They're not necessarily balanced. They're not necessarily honest, I should say. And with that inherent quality, you need regulation. So the state was there to say, okay, here's a platform of rules that you're going to have to kind of follow. You know, if this guy pulls this trick over here, this sleight of hand here, he's going to be punished by this policy and you're going to be rewarded this and that. Hence the nature of the legal system. That's the kernel of state regulation. Now, what's the great flaw with all this? In a monetary-driven culture, which is what this has all evolved into, what can money do? It can influence regulation. It can buy state power. It can morph itself directly into the edifice. And that's what the evolution has been. Mercantilism was sort of the reverse of this. Mercantilism was state monopoly-driven stuff, like kings, you know, monarchs. They send out their little pirate ships with protection, and they go and they steal spices and slaves, and they basically control everything from the top. Adam Smith came along and said, no, we don't like that. We're going to reverse the process. So we're going to say the market should be free, which in theory and poetry is great. But what happened? The corporate power, so I shouldn't say corporate because that's actually a modern concept, the business concept, the business enterprise, the business acumen comes forward and starts to inch its way back into the governmental apparatus, which it was always there to begin with, but it inches its way in a different form. So it swaps roles, basically. Instead of state control of business, now it's business control of the state. What was the Bush administration? Bush administration was representative power of the oil industry. What is the Obama administration? If you look at his actual active policies, he's representing the banking institution. The state has always been comprised, historically, one direction or another, of the larger order of business powers, because that's what the world's driven by. It's driven by business, right? If you didn't have a focus on economics, then the whole system would dwindle away. You have to keep that pressure going, and therefore you are going to invariably have state and business collusion at all times. So nothing came before the other. It's a natural process of protection, regulation, corruption of that regulation, which in truth, all regulation is corruption one way or another. The entire legal system with the police and everything is there in part to keep the lower classes in a position of control so they don't have the power to take the immense amount of wealth that has been already basically stolen by the upper classes. Now we have 40% of the wealth owned by 1% of the world's population. So you see how this synergy has worked out. So if you want to get rid of the state, you got to get rid of the source of it, which is basically scarcity. And then basically, if you want to get rid of scarcity in this modern world, you got to get rid of the market, because the market needs scarcity. And I describe this from a standpoint of post-scarcity, meaning I am aware of the statistics and the trends that we have now, that we can create a new social model, highly participatory, not central planning, not dictatorial, where you can create a new apparatus for social interfacing in commerce and exchange, not exchange per se, but in the creation of ideas and creating facilities to initiate ideas and bring goods into service and everything else without the use of money, and hence creating interest in abundance and post-scarcity. In other words, if you want to get rid of the state and this power consolidation process, you have to get rid of the market at this stage.
If you want to get rid of the mechanism of price, which is what the economic calculation problem states is the ultimate mediator of decisions, price can take subjective human whims and convert them into objective numerical values, that is price. So all of us, heterogeneous goods can be compared very easily. So this microphone can find value with this bottle of water because we can put an arbitrary, subjective, utilitarian value on what we think these things mean, with a little hint of technical value. There's a little bit of labor, energy, and price. There's a little bit of scarcity in price, but all of that is extremely obscure because it's not actually going back to any root relationship that pertains to the materials used or the mechanisms used. It's only determined by the competitive thing of the market that keeps spiraling around, which produces these values. So I hope that makes sense. Now you mentioned layman's terms. But really, and I said this in my lecture, if you want to get rid of this problem, as they say, which means determining value, you just get rid of exchange explicitly. And you create a mechanism, which we can do now through technology, where the individual can directly relate to the means of production. So to reduce this down, I use the example of a printer. Imagine in some towns they have 3D printing offices where you can send a 3D printing design, and you send it there and they print it for you. Of course you pay for it now, but you're basically in control of this mini factory system in these 3D printing processes. Imagine if the world was organized with large-scale, extremely well-crafted, not 3D printing, but manufacturing facilities that did the same thing as your home printer. You did it on demand. So you sat at home, you engaged the process. Again, the layman's term thing is hard to do. I'm doing my best. Because I did the whole lecture on this in Germany. That was the whole point of this. Is you can create a means to engage directly, participatorily, run through algorithmic filters that make sure that you have the highest sustainability of the materials you're using, coupled with the ability of everyone else to engage and contribute to your design through this process, which is brilliant. It's really the sharing of the group mind. And this thing will evolve into a catalog of goods, which people input into this system, which are available to everyone as well. To print ideally on demand, I think the highest state of the future are these highly advanced industrial systems that can basically create the vast majority of goods on demand without the need for specialized structures that we have today driven by corporations that only do certain things. So you put as many good productions as you can in one center, which we can do. Again, feminalization applies to this as well. You just have to be more strategic in how you design things and the materials that you use. So the economic calculation problem has actually been debunked numerous times by socialists a long time ago. They were using standardized computer algorithmic thought to think about how to put units, quantifiable units. For example, scarcity. People talk about scarcity in the market economy. No one really knows the state of scarcity because of secrets. No one really knows how many diamonds there are. Obviously, no one knows how much oil there is because the debate has been raging forever, and everyone keeps lying. Everyone keeps getting caught lying. Now they do these projections that are completely made up. You know, most of the analysis you see about this new resurgence of hydrocarbon energy, these are projections made with numbers that they don't even have. They're just taking tiny little trends and throwing them way out in the future. And that's how they've been doing this for years, which is why you can't really believe any of it. So you can't say that the market actually accounts for scarcity in price because no one even knows. You can't, it's not quantifiable. If it was, you can go to a database right now and see every single resource and what we know about every single resource. They might have that in the internal secret workings of De Beers diamonds, but then again, they're in competition with other diamond producers, and they're not going to release what they have. So that's in order to do it in the future, in other words, you have to have absolute allocation, absolute awareness of all the resources definitively. So you have to share all the information. And then you create algorithms that denote scarcity of certain goods. Let me state this very simply and see if I can do it without a visual accompaniment. Every single material has a set of conducive propensities. So copper is good for conducting electricity, right? And there are numerous other metals that are good for that too, but with different degrees of efficiency. So right there you have a measure. If you want to delegate a certain metal to conduct electricity, you set up a grid and you look at all the major metals that do so very well. You rate their efficiency, which is very objectively quantifiable based on the gauge and all the things that go along with it. And then you compare the efficiency to the amount of scarcity. And boom, you have a direct numerical correlation. And with that process, in calculation done rapidly by a computer, you can decide at any given point, based on comparing the efficiency of any given thing, any given metal, based on how much scarcity is available of each, which means you prioritize based on the most you have. You come up with, boom, that one metal that is most optimized and most sustainable for that given point in time. That is true economic calculation of material. So, I'll leave it at that. And you can watch the rest of the lecture for more on that stuff. Simone?
Was that the latest version?
I was going to add 2 points. There is actually a really good essay online, I forget, Neil Kernan shared it a while ago, which explains how price isn't a rational measure either, because those prices themselves are subject to the very market they claim to rule. Just think about that for one moment. The fact that the idea that price should be rational isn't. Exactly, absolutely. Not just that, you could have a $15,000 handbag, you know, all this kind of stuff. And also, and the second point is, it doesn't alleviate scarcity whatsoever at all. In the following example, which you actually mentioned on the radio years ago, some idiot, economist, wrote in and said, money operates very well to stop scarcity because if we ran out of all the oil, of course, oil gets more and more expensive until we just had one barrel that was $1 trillion, so we'll never run out of oil. Do I need to explain the idiocy of this? So actually, there is no, those 3 points generally, yeah, absolutely operant efficiency, price is a non-rational force. In fact, as informed by the market, they get it the wrong way around, as usual. They like to do that. And then the third one is it doesn't at all stop scarcity, other than it stops you to be able to purchase it, which sounds like coercion to me. From a non-coercive bunch of Austrians, it seems quite ironic.
I have one more thing. Price not only doesn't stop scarcity in that way, it perpetuates it. Yeah. The market system wants scarcity. It needs to preserve it. The last thing the market wants is high levels of efficiency and abundance and things that don't require constant servicing. Imagine for a moment if someone right now produced a solar array based on the technology we have today with 80% conversion efficiency as opposed to the 18% that we can barely get right now in the consumer markets. And they put these things out through printing mechanisms where a person simply acquired a 3D printer that could print these sheets, right? They put it in their homes. Very simple layers. It's very easy technology these days. And they were able to basically, with one purchase of a printing system, have all of their power driven in their home for the next 100 years without any servicing whatsoever. Maybe a little maintenance on that printer every now and again. And you did this over the course of 5 years, and let's use the United States as an example, where there's about 150 million households. And you were able to provide this equipment to every single one of these households within 5 years. That would be a catastrophe for the entire utility and energy industry. Now that would be beautifully efficient, wouldn't it? Amazingly efficient. Everyone would be off the grid, they'd be completely reliant on the sun. There's a ubiquitous source of energy that really powers pretty much everything on the planet. But no, that would be a disaster for the market. So the price is the worst because it preserves scarcity. It doesn't even come close to wanting abundance. It hates that.